The topic for today's workshop is no code. And no code is kind of this magical topic right now. I actually work as a freelance developer. One sec, I'm also gonna put the chat on my other screen just so if anything comes up, you can send me messages in the chat. Cool. So no code is this sort of magical topic these days. It's very popular and it's really a helpful thing to be aware of. And it's come up for me because I work as a freelancer. So one of the questions that comes up a lot in my work is that people will hire me as a freelancer because they don't have any coders in their company already, right? They don't have someone on staff who can do this stuff. And so then, I can code this amazing thing, but then at the end of the day, how are they going to actually update it, make sure it keeps working? I can hand off great code to them, but if they don't understand what's going on and have anyone on staff who can maintain it, then there might be a problem in the future, and I have to keep being available to help them. So there are solutions that have come out that can help include people without coding background, people who are non-technical, in building various types of applications and solutions. And I think that's super exciting because it means that, this process can be more inclusive of people of different backgrounds, and also it makes a lot of things easier. But no code kind of sounds like this magical word. It sounds like, oh, there's never any code anymore and you don't need to know anything about coding. Why are you hearing this from a coding boot camp? And it turns out no code, it doesn't really mean that nobody's writing code anymore. What it more means is that you're going to be using other people's code. So the process of no code is more about using other people's code. And by other people, I mean external tools, right? So when you're building no code solutions, usually what you end up looking for is whether there's some great tool on the internet that some other company has built that does what you need. And usually these tools on the internet, they have user-friendly interfaces. So they're essentially going to write code for you, but they're going to do it through something that is easier to use and looks prettier than what coders usually do all day, right? Usually when I'm writing code all day, I'm just writing text. It just looks like a bunch of words and characters on my screen. So they translate that into being something visual and that's usable to someone who maybe doesn't have experience with writing text and characters on their screen. So I think that's a great thing because it makes the process more inclusive. But it doesn't mean that there's no code involved anymore, right? It means that these services basically write code for you. And that also means that developers, coders aren't obsolete. No code doesn't mean that there's no sense in learning how to code anymore. In fact, the same types of problem solving and mindsets that you need to code still apply with no code solutions. So if you're really good at building websites with code, you're probably still going to be really good at building websites with no code tools. You'll understand immediately what they're doing and how they work. And the other facet is that the quality of actual code itself that a no code solution is going to make for you automatically, it might not be as good as what a developer themselves would write. So if the quality of the code is really important to what you're building, then no code might not be the right way to go. And also if you're building something really non-standard, right? If you're just building a website that needs to have like a contact page and a home page, you can probably do it with no code. If you want to build the next Google and you need, millions of documents worth of data, then probably no code can't really do it for you. So it works for the most standard types of use cases. But if you get into something that's extremely technical, then no code might stop being the best way to go about things. That being said, no code can be really useful for standard solutions. And that's kind of what we're going to look at today. And that's mostly what people need anyway. So what kind of stuff does no code replace? Well, one of the most common things that no code replaces is what's called a CMS. The most standard CMS that you'll see is called WordPress. And basically what WordPress does is a developer can set up a website for you, but then even if you don't know how to code, it gives you an interface to change things. That's kind of what a content management system means. You don't need to be able to code in order to change content on the site. No code, and we'll look at a service that's actually called Webflow. So Webflow is this service that basically replaces WordPress, but it lets you do some things that might actually be hard to do in WordPress. And I would say that in general, not always, but in general, for a WordPress site, you're going to need a developer to set things up first. With Webflow, it's really possible with no background in coding to go in and make your own website. So let's see how that actually happens. So the first thing I'm going to do is just to go to webflow.com and to make a new site for us. So I'll hop over to a new browser tab and I'll go to webflow.com. Cool. And so this is this website called Webflow. I'm already logged in. So it takes me to my dashboard page. You can see I actually have the website that is showing up with screenshots and the slides. And so if I didn't have an account already, oh, is it blinking for other people? Hopefully no. So if I didn't already have an account on this website, then I would need to sign up. And Webflow also, let me go down. Is there a pricing page here? No, let's find it. Webflow pricing. So Webflow is not free. I should mention that up front, that for a free plan, you can only have 2 websites. And they limit how many items you can have in the CMS, right? How much data you can actually have. And bandwidth, that refers to how many people basically can access your website, how much traffic can go through. So if you're really launching a website with it, you probably will end up having to pay at least $12 a month is basically what I would say. But the pricing will depend a little bit on the needs of your actual website. So just to put out that it's not free, but on my side, I'm sticking to my 2 free sites. So I'm going to make a new site on Webflow. So I'll make a new site. And then when you go to make a new site, they give you a bunch of templates. And it's a great idea if you have no background in coding to start with a template. If you say, oh, I want something that looks kind of like this, you can buy one, or you can start with some from them that they look pretty plain, but they give you already kind of the layout of a site. So you can totally start with a template from them. But I'm actually going to start with a totally blank website, since I think we learn more by starting with a blank canvas. So I'm going to call it, I don't know, lecture demo for, or maybe I'll call it like Le Wagon workshop demo. And then I'll create this site. And it makes a new website for me. And what this is going to look like is, if any of you have used design software before, I saw there were some designers in the chat. It looks exactly like design software. It's really set up. There's a service called Figma that a lot of people use to make like sketches of how websites should look, mock-ups of them. And Webflow is like making a mock-up of how the design of your website should look, but then it actually becomes a real working website at the end of the day, which is pretty cool. So you might be wondering, okay, what kind of a website should we make? And the thing that I thought would make sense is if I go to another tab, lewagon.com, that's the website for this company. Let's just try to kind of rip off this website, right? So let's try to make as good of a copy of this as we can in a limited time. And the first thing I notice over here is it says, change your life, learn to code, right? So let's try to put that on our Webflow webpage. That's the Le Wagon slogan. So whenever you want to add something to your website, you go over to the left and there's this little thing that says add an element, right? And then it gives you all of these pieces of a website that you can add. And I say that there's kind of 2 types of elements. Some concern layout, and some concern actual content. So one of the ones that I could put on is called a heading. And the general rule with websites is all websites should have one heading at least that says what the website's about. That's good for people who, if you have users that are sight impaired, like maybe they're blind, then it helps them understand what the website's actually about. And it also is good for search engine optimization. So Google can understand our website. So I'm going to put a heading over here. And headings have different levels, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see they get smaller. So you want it to kind of be that the first heading on your site should be a heading 1, and then anything inside of that should be a heading 2, and so on. So then I can put some text in here. I can say, change your life, learn code. Okay, that looks all right. Right now we have some text on our page, and that was just drag and drop. But the problem is right now, so I can push this little preview button and I can see what my web page is going to actually look like. And you see how this text is really just like all the way on the left, right? So it probably doesn't make so much sense that my website would have all the text on the left. Probably I want to kind of push it a little more to the center. And that's where these elements that are for layout come into play. So if I add an element, and I can look at this layout section. For example, there's one called a container. And I can put in a container. I'll just put it before that header. And you see how the container doesn't show me anything. It's not about content on my site, right? It's not about actual text or images. It's about where things that are inside of it will go. So if I want this heading to be inside of that container, I just drag it into it. And what my container does, now if I click on this little heading icon, I can see there's body. Body refers to my whole website. There's container. That's the thing I dragged in that was the layout. And then the header is inside of that container. So what the container does is it puts a little bit of spacing on the sides, right? So what my container is doing is it's creating these 2 gaps on the sides. So as I work on my website, I can start putting out the layout. And you may notice I'm not starting with colors or fonts, right? Those things can come later. The most important piece at the beginning is that you have all of the content that should be on your website, and then that you have it kind of laid out in the appropriate ways. So let's hop back to the Wagon site. Let's see what other stuff I can rip off of here. Oh, well, it looks like there's a picture. I'm just going to drag that picture to my downloads folder so that I can copy that picture exactly to Webflow. And then it also says through immersive bootcamps, etc. So let's copy that text. I'm going to hop back to Webflow. Let me close up this tab. And then I want to put some more text, but this text should be smaller, right? It's not really a heading. So most of the text that shows up on our website, we call that paragraph. That just means like normal text that doesn't have a special purpose, right? Unlike headers that are the structure of my page. And so I'm just going to put that underneath. It puts some sample text, but I can double click on it and I can edit it. And then I can just paste in what we copied. That looks good. And then the last thing we had was an image. Okay, let me find, there's an image element. Images and videos, they go under media here. So I'm going to put in an image element. Ooh, let me make sure that it goes actually underneath that text. There we go. And then I can choose an image. It says to drag and drop one there. So I'm going to take that one that I just drag and dropped from the website, copy it into this little, they call it an asset manager. That's where all of your images go. And then my image shows up there. So now we already have all of that content. And then let's say, oh, you know, I want this text and this image to show up side by side. Then what I could do, there's this layout that it looks like it just says columns, right? So let's put this thing that says columns inside of our container. And then let's just put the text in the left column, just drag and drop, and the image in the right column. And now we're already sort of starting to get there with our layout. So that's step one. I'm going to spare you putting in all of the content. And the reason is because it's really just drag and drop, right? You push this plus button, you find the thing that looks like what you want. You know, if I want, let's say I want a checkbox. I would drag in a checkbox. And then you just drag it into the page. But you are going to want to think about layout and content. Those are the key two pieces. The layout is where things go, and the content is what text and images and elements are actually there. So we made our site. We found that we could drag and drop things onto the page. I'm going to check. Cool. No urgent questions have come in. Cool. So you drag things onto the page, and it adds these layout and content elements to your page. And so the first thing that you always want to do, and this applies with coding too, when you're making your website, is to define the actual page structure. What elements should go on it, what layout and content. And if you're a designer, this is going to feel basically the same as what you're used to. But instead of just being a mock-up that you'll give to developers and they'll make it for you, with Webflow, you're actually making the website itself through this design process, and it works at the end. So if I go back to my Webflow and I say, you know what, I'm going to push this publish button. It looks fancy. Let's publish it. You can publish it to your own domain, right? So you can have your own website to put it at, but I'm not going to set that up right now. I'm just going to go with the default, which is like Le Wagon workshop demo.webflow.io. That's where on the internet this will go. And I'll push publish. It'll take a second. Looks great. And then I can click this link to open it up. So now if I go to Le Wagon workshop demo.webflow.io, that website we started building is in my browser. I could send this link out to anyone, and if they open it up, they'll see the exact same thing in their browser. So that's how this is different from a design process, right? It feels the same, but at the end of the day, we have a real website. So let's dive into some sort of even more advanced features of Webflow. I would just make sure no questions have come in. I'm seeing some questions. Will this be recorded? Yes, this will be recorded and you'll get access. And I'm not aware of a web or of an offline version of Webflow. You kind of do have to use it on the internet. Yeah. So one thing that will come up with Webflow is that you can actually have multiple pages on Webflow. So I'm going to hop back to the Webflow. And if I click where it says page home, right now, that's just our home page. But you can have as many pages as you need on a website. So I could create a new page, and I could call it contact. You may be wondering, like, what does slug mean? It sounds like a very slimy creature. Slug means literally what comes after, like, myawesomesite.com/ and then if I say contact here, I would go to /contact to get there, right? When you're using a website, the URL changes based on the page you are. The thing in the browser bar changes. So if I say /contact, then that means that I can go to mywebsite.com/contact to get there. That's what a slug is. And you can put some more information. For search engines, you can put the title, you can put a description. You know, I could say the description is contact Le Wagon or something. And you can change all of these different settings. And then when I push create, I'll have not just a home page, but I'll also have a contact page. And it's a whole different website, so this is blank, right? There's nothing on it. But I could always put a container, kind of like we did last time, and put a header. Ooh, excuse me. Put a header in here that says, like, contact us. And we'll fill it out later. The thing is, right now, if I go to, let's publish this. So if I go to my actual live website, which I have open in another tab, and I refresh, right, there's no way to get between these pages. So now if I go to /contact, I get there, but I don't have a way back to the home page. So I need some kind of a nav bar that's going to get me between these pages. And the reason why I'm showing you that it's on 2 pages is I need this same element in multiple places, right? And that's a really important thing in Webflow, because when I need an element to be in multiple places, I could just copy and paste it. But if I did, it would get really annoying, right? If I say, okay, I have this element here and I copy it here and I copy it here and I copy it here. When I change it, I would have to go and find all of the places I copy and pasted and change it everywhere, which would get really annoying. So what I can do instead is I can create what's called a symbol. And a symbol in Webflow is an element where you can put it in as many places and pages as you want. But when you update it in one place, it updates it everywhere. So something like a nav bar is a perfect use case for that. So let's go and let's add a new element. And let's see, I think they have a built-in nav bar that we can manipulate to our own uses. Yeah, if I go to the very bottom, there's a section and there's actually a nav bar here. So I can add the nav bar to my page. It doesn't look so great right now, but it has a spot for a logo. You know, I can change the colors of it. It says home here, and that's a link. And if I click on this little settings icon, right now this link doesn't go anywhere. But I can say, I want this link to go to a particular page. I choose the page setting, and I choose the page I want, and I say this link should go to the home page. Then there's a link for about. We don't have an about page, so I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to push the delete key. And then there's a link for contact. I'm going to go to it and say, this should go to a page. When I click on it, it should go to the contact page. And now we're going to have this link, this nav bar on my contact page. You see how contact's actually blue because we're on that page right now. But it's not on my home page. Still, if I were to go to my home page, it's not there. So if I go back to contact, how do we make a symbol so I can get it on both pages? Well, the second tab in Webflow is called symbols. And I'm just going to select my nav bar, open symbols, and say create a new symbol. And I'm going to give it a name of nav bar. And now you can see it grays out the rest of the page and it highlights the nav bar that I had selected. And so now my nav bar is a symbol. And now if I go to my home page and I drag in that nav bar, sorry, I did that quickly. I opened up the symbols tab and I drag in the nav bar, just like I would drag in another element. Then it adds it to this page and it looks the same as in the contact page. And if I want to change things about it, I can just double click on it. So as an example, like let's put the Wagon logo in it. I'm going to go to the Wagon website, I'm going to drag and drop the logo to my downloads folder, and I'm just going to drag it in there. Hopefully it'll support this. Oh, for some reason it's giving it like no width and height, but I'm going to set its width to be 100 pixels and its height to be auto. Maybe that's a little bit small. Let's make it a little bit bigger. It seems like it doesn't have a default width and height. I think you can actually also drag it a little bit. Yeah, so drag and drop. Let's make it a little bit bigger. That looks okay for now. This won't be the prettiest website in the world. But so I added this image to my homepage, but because it was inside of a symbol, now if I go to the contact page, it's there too, right? So that's the purpose of these things called symbols. Is remember how we had elements like headers and things that I could drag and drop to the page? It's just when you make your own and you can reuse it as many times as you want. And if you change it somewhere, it will be updated everywhere. So maybe one other change I could make to it. Right now, the background's gray. This gets at a thing that I wanted to show too. So there's this whole section. I've double clicked on it. I've opened it up. And there's this whole section over on the right that says style. And this style section, it's kind of like using like the formatting panel in Microsoft Word, right? If you want to change your fonts and things. So there's a spacing section and there's different pieces, like there's margin. If I wanted to add empty space on the top, like white space, then I could increase the margin. You just drag it to make it bigger, or you can also type. And if I want to add a little bit of padding too, like let's say maybe I'll add a padding of 10 pixels on the top and a padding of 10 pixels on the bottom. What that does is that creates space inside, right? So it's not white space on the outside, it's space on the inside of the element. And also, you can change things like fonts and colors. So for example, if I just scroll down, like this panel, it has a lot of options, but you will understand quite a lot of it if you just scroll through it. If you go to the background section, it says there's a background color. Right now it's number DDD. Colors on websites have numbers. You don't have to understand them to use Webflow. You can just click on the color and then you can drag around. And as I drag, it would make it red. I think on the actual website, it was actually just white. So I'll make it white just to match the one that's actually online. And so that's the style tab. And because I changed the style on a symbol, it's on both websites, right? If I go to the home page, it looks the same. So now we're getting a little closer to the real site. So that's symbols. I'm just going to check chat and questions. Cool. So yeah, unfortunately, no offline version. There were a couple of others. Okay, so to what degree will no coders be able to replace full stack developers? We'll do pros and cons at the end. So stay tuned to the end of lecture if you want to hear kind of like when this is useful and when not. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So next thing is CMS collections in Webflow. And these are kind of like spreadsheets, but they support all kinds of different types of data. And so an example of why you would need a collection is, let's say we're Le Wagon, we offer this bootcamp in 41 different cities. So I want to have a different web page for every single city where it's offered. That's where this idea of collections comes into handy. So here's how I use them. So I go back to Webflow and I go over to, I guess it's the fourth tab. It's called CMS. And I say that I want to make a new collection. And then I give it a name. So, I would call it cities if it's going to be all of the cities in our site. And then it has some fields. The default ones are the name and the slug. The name could be Paris or Berlin, right? That just comes by default. The slug would just be like if it's /Berlin/Paris, it'll make that automatically for me, actually. And then there's custom fields. So I can add a new field, and it gives me different types of things that I can add to it. So maybe as one example, we could add some rich text. That means that you can have bold and italics and things in the text in this column. And I could give it a name, and I'm going to call it description. So this will be where we just say, like, Berlin is the German capital or something. And I don't think we really need to fill out the others for right now. So I can add as many of these different properties as I want. And you'll see how we use these in a second. And then I'm going to create it. And then I'm going to add a new city. Now it takes me to the page for all of my cities, but I don't have any yet. It can make them automatically for you, but it gives them really silly names. It just like makes up random words, so I won't do it. But I can add a new city. I can call it Berlin. It gives me a slug of Berlin. And description, like the capital city of Germany and a great Le Wagon office or something. Create it. And I can keep adding as many as I need. So let's get at least 2 in here. So I'm also going to add Paris. And I'll say, okay, the birthplace of Le Wagon, it did indeed start in Paris. And I'll create them. And now we have 2 cities over here. So then how can I use these? Well, maybe one thing I could do is on the home page, we could add a list of all of the cities. So let's go, okay, I'm going to go back to my home page. And then on the home page, I'm going to add a new element. Same way as I added the headers. And there's actually this section called CMS, and there's one thing in here called the collection list. So I'm going to add the collection list. Just add it below at the bottom of our existing page, but in the container, so there's spacing. And then you say which collection you want to use. And we just made one called cities, so I'm going to choose that. And you can choose the layout. That basically means, do you want them on top of each other? Do you want them side by side? But right now they don't show anything, right? But I can see, okay, There's 2 boxes, right? Because I had 2 cities. I have Paris and I have Berlin. So there's 1 box in for each of them. And if I want to fill things in for each box, then I just go back to the Elements tab and I choose the elements I want to put in each box. So the elements I can pick, for example, would be like a heading. So let's put a heading inside there. Right now it says heading. It shouldn't be a heading 1 since I already have one of those. It should be second level, right? Because each city is the second level heading of my page. It's like little folders. So I'm going to choose an H2. And now they both just say heading. If I change the text to, you see how it changes in both places. But I don't want to hard code the text, right? I want the text to come dynamically out of each of the city. I want it to be the city's name. And whenever I want something to change based on the data in the collection, I tick this green checkbox that says get data from cities. And then I select field. So here's where I can say, do I want it to say the name or the description or something else here? And I want it to say the name. So I'm going to pick name. And when I do that, now it says Paris and it says Berlin. And I can add other stuff in here too. So for example, I could add, there's this block called rich text. Let's add it since we also had a description that was rich text. And I'll say get text from cities. And I'm going to choose the description tab. And then it's going to show me the different cities there. I should mention too that you can also have a specific page for each city. So if I go to pages, it says cities template. And this is where I would have a specific page for Berlin and a specific page for Paris. I'll do this somewhat quickly, but I'll add a container. And, oh, well, first, maybe I'll actually add our symbol, our nav bar, right? That's on every page. Put the container underneath it. And then I'll add a heading. So in H1, get text from cities. Let's pick the name. It says Berlin, because right now I'm on the Berlin page, but if I were on the Paris page, it would say that. And then rich text, we put that below inside the container and get text from cities description. And then how would I link to this page? So if I go back to the home page where we have this list, I can actually make each one of these be a link. So there's this thing called a link block, a basic element that just makes a link to another page. So I can put that, maybe I'll just put it before where it says Paris. And then let's say get URL from cities. And, oh, excuse me, don't say get URL from cities. That's a different thing. That would be if I were writing a URL to like a separate website as part of my CMS. You go to the Pages tab and you choose that the page you want is the page for the current city. And then I just put whatever I want to be inside of the link. So for example, if I want the word Paris to be the link, I'll put it in that link block. And now it shows up blue like a link on a website. And what that means is now if I publish it and I go and check it out in my browser, or actually that'll take a sec. I'll just push this preview button here. If I click on Paris, then it takes me to the page for Paris. And if I go home again, I didn't make that a link, but the home page is a link. And I click Berlin, it goes to a page for Berlin. So kind of a quick explanation, but that's how CMS collections are useful. It's like having a spreadsheet, but it actually can make websites for you and also make repeated content on websites, right? And to edit it, we had that page where, let me go there, you open up CMS, you open up cities, and you just add new cities like it's a spreadsheet. So this is something that people who don't know how to code, you can definitely teach someone on your company, like just click those 2 buttons and then add the cities you need. And so it's really easy to update and add content over time. And these can have images, they can have whatever, basically. So that's the purpose of collections and of the CMS tab. I'm just checking out if there's any urgent questions on that. Cool. So can you also make e-commerce and stuff with Webflow? Yes. Actually, in the challenge, we'll do some e-commerce stuff. So the CMS stuff can get even more advanced if you work with e-commerce using Webflow. Yeah. Okay, so next thing, first part, Webflow. Next thing, how are we going to connect Webflow with other services? So the thing that happens with no code a lot is that unlike coding, where you're building your whole solution yourself, with no code, you're working with a bunch of different services, and they're all here, here, and here, and they're all in the cloud, right? That's a drawing of a cloud. I hope you can tell that that was meant to be that. And the question is, how do they talk to each other, right? You have to create connections so that your data gets shared between different services. And one of the services that we use a lot, I like to say that it's kind of like our database for no code. One of the various services you can use to keep track of a lot of your data is called Airtable. And Airtable, so next slide. Airtable looks a lot like Excel, right? From this picture, you can kind of see this looks a whole lot like a spreadsheet. It's the kind of thing that if you've made documents, you'll kind of understand how to use most of it immediately. It looks a lot like Excel. It's very user-friendly, but it lets you actually create websites. And it's based on the web, and then you can talk to other services with it. So let's hop over to Airtable. I should mention too, I'll spare you the pricing page, but if you're considering actually using this for a real service, you'll need to check if the pricing works for what you want. They give you quite a lot on their free plan, but you have to upgrade if you want advanced features. I actually use it a decent amount, so I have a lot of spreadsheets already made. They call their spreadsheets bases, but I'm going to make a new base. And I'm going to call it the Wagon Workshop. You can give it an icon. I can make it just say LE. That's fine. And then just like Excel, you get different tables, right? So different tabs that you can work on, and you can name them. So I could call this one cities. And then I could have a city named Paris and a city named Berlin. So this is how Airtable works. It's just like a spreadsheet. It has all these other tabs that it just added by default, other columns, but I can just remove them for now if I don't need them. We're going to see what types of columns you can add in a sec. And then I can add another tab. So I'll add a new one, create an empty table, and I'm going to call it students. This is what's going to be really new. And the reason why I'm doing this in Airtable is so imagine you're working for a coding bootcamp, and people are going to be applying for the bootcamp, and then they're going to be graduating, and you need to keep track of all of the students you've had. Probably you would need some kind of a spreadsheet, a database table to keep track of them. And also, your marketing team would probably use it, right? So the purpose of switching to a different service from Webflow here is that I'm making something that my marketing team could totally use. The sales team can look at this. They can keep track of the student information they need here. So it's a way to talk among different teams and maybe not make all of the marketing people go on the service that actually builds your website. And my students, okay, they can have a name. That looks good. Probably I don't need notes on them. Probably I don't need an assignee for right now. And I probably don't need a status. But I think probably we're going to need to know their email. And so when I click this plus button to add a new field, you can pick what the type of it is, right? This is what's a little different from Excel. You have to pick a type. And one of them is there's an email type. So I'm going to add an email column, and I'll call it email. And now if I type people in, like it can have like Mary applies, and her email, everyone's email is going to be like mary@mary.com right now. I'm too uncreative to do anything else. I could add phone numbers. You kind of get the picture. One of the really important things that Webflow can do for you as well that I should note is I could add another column, and I could say city. And I could add that as just a single line of text, and I could say, you know, Mary studied in Berlin. But the problem with that is that doesn't connect in any way to our other table that talked about the cities. Those two things aren't related to each other. And so what I actually want to do, I don't want to just write the word, right? I want to make a link and say, oh, actually, Berlin is the first column or the first row in my cities table. That's what we call, you will hear this word relational database. That's a very coding word. But actually, it's pretty simple to do it in Airtable, just visually, no code involved, right? So I'm going to click on my column, customize the field type. Instead of making it be text, let's actually change it to be what they call a single select. And a single select, oh, excuse me, not a single select. Where are the links here? A lookup is what I mean. Wait. Will it let us do this? Link to another record. Sorry, that's what I meant. It was the very first thing. Link to another record. And then what I do is I pick, okay, which of these tabs do I want to make a link to? And it's to cities. That's where the cities were. And then you can choose whether you want multiple or not. I only want one city, right? So I'm going to limit it. And then I'll save it. Yeah, it asked me, do I want to convert because I'll lose the data I typed in? That's fine. Okay, now it does it. And now, oh, it actually even automatically found it. But now it found that because I typed Berlin for Mary, her city's Berlin. And if I click on it, it shows me the Berlin entry from the other table. And I can do the same thing with other people. So I can have Carl. Carl will be carl@carl.com. And Carl studied in Paris. So I just push the plus button and I can click on any of the ones in my other table. So now Carl's in Paris. So you can create relationships between data and Airtable. That's one of the many advantages of it over something like Excel. And it's web-based. You can share it with people, etc. You can also do all kinds of formulas and analytics. I won't get into that today. Okay, so we made a table to keep track of our students, first thing. I'm getting a question. Is this free to use? They have a good free plan, but for commercial use, you might have to pay them. Yeah. In terms of safety of using it, I would check their privacy policy. A lot of companies do use Airtable, so it's not a crazy idea to use it. But if you're, dealing with state secrets, I probably wouldn't. So let's make a workspace to keep track of our students. We've done that. And next thing, so now we have a table in our Airtable, and we have our Webflow. And let's make them actually talk to each other. So how do I make these two things actually communicate? And why would I want to make them communicate? Well, let's think about a scenario. I'm going to hop over to Webflow again. I'm going to go, we had a contact page and it had really nothing on it, right? What should usually go on a contact page? Probably a form you fill out. Either that or an email, but we'll go with a form now. So I'm going to go to the plus button to add a new element. And guess what? There is already an element called a form block in Webflow. Just going to drag and drop it below the contact. Oh, that kind of got too wide. So let's make sure. Let's select the whole thing, whole form. Let's get it inside of the container. Oop, it really doesn't want to drag and drop here. Okay, let's try this again. Our form block under contact us. Cool. Now it's there. Great. And guess what? We're really lucky. Also, I planned it. The form automatically just puts a name and an email address. But in this form section, there are more things you can drag in. So if you want more inputs, those are the things you can type in. If you want checkboxes, you want drop downs, those are called select. There's more stuff you can add to the form. But for right now, I'll just add the name and the email address. And what's going to happen right now, if I preview it and I try typing into it, so I try typing, I don't know, Christine@Christine.com. And I try submitting it. It's just kind of going to tell me your form isn't published yet on your actual website. Try it out later. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make it so that when I click on this submit button, I wanted to actually send that information, right? Send the name and the email address. I want it to send that over to Airtable. I guess I have it in that tab there. And it is completely possible to do this in a few steps. So this is a common thing that happens with no code, is that you use different services, but you make them talk to each other. So let's integrate all of this. First, I make a form. Then I go to Airtable and I add what's called an automation. On Airtable's end, automations are when, particular events happen based on what you do in Airtable. So I go to Airtable and I go to the automations tab. It loads it. And then there's all kinds of different things I can listen for. So I'm going to add a new trigger. The trigger is what should happen to actually start this whole process. Whenever we're dealing with talking with different services, I like to think about it as if this, then that. There's actually a service on the internet called if this, then that. We're not going to use it today, but that's why it's called that. So the first thing is, okay, what needs to happen to start the process? It's the if this piece. That's what is called the trigger. And so what I want to do is I could, for example, say, oh, when a new record gets created, when I add something, do something. But I'm not going to do this interaction on Airtable's end, right? I want Airtable to listen and Webflow to contact Airtable when someone fills out the form. And that's what's called a webhook. A webhook is when we have this service just listen. So webhook, it's like making an ear, and it's going to listen for any requests that come in. Webflow is going to contact Airtable. So we're saying start listening. So I'm going to say when a webhook is received, then we'll listen. And then, okay, it's saying, yeah, here's a link. Whenever you want to send a webhook, send it to this link. So let's copy this link. So step one is I just say, make a webhook, start listening, and then we need to give Webflow this link. So when it does, so when someone fills out the form, it pings this link. Okay, so that's step two. Or I guess actually that's step three here, but we can skip around. So if I hop over to Webflow, what I need to do is I need to go to Webflow, and if I click on this main little menu, it says project settings. So that's where you set up, all of your general settings, etc. And there's a tab in here. It's taken Webflow a second to load this for us, but there will be a tab in here that is called integrations, if memory serves. Okay, it's going for it. I think the screen sharing is eating up my data. So let's go to integrations. And if I go to integrations, I think there's just a section called webhooks here. Yeah, there is. So let's add a new webhook. And on the Airtable side, this is saying, if something happens on Airtable's end, then ping the webhook. Call that receiver we set up over at Airtable and tell it that something happened. So what should cause this? What's the if this? We have two options. One of them is form submission. That sounds about right. And then I'm just going to paste in the link. So add the webhook. Okay, so now when you submit a form on Airtable's end, or on Webflow's end, it will contact Airtable. And then I just need, maybe actually let's test it and let's just see if that worked. Just going to go to our live website. I'll refresh. I'll go to the contact page. And I'll put in my name as Celestine, and my email address is celestine@celestine.com. And I'll submit it. Okay, on Webflow's end, it worked. So it doesn't seem like anything went wrong, but we haven't set up Airtable to know what to do with it. But this is where I get to the next piece with Airtable's end, is it says test step. You can test the trigger. I'm going to push that button. What that does is it checks, have you sent any requests to this link I copied recently? And oh, it's successful. Yes, it did. It found a webhook, and that has a body that says, oh, it was the email form, and it has data. And that's where name Celestine and email Celestine is in there. That's the stuff I filled out in the form, right? So when I push test, it finds the last time I submitted the form, what data it got. So then what I need to do is I need to tell Airtable, okay, take the name and the email out of here, right? Take these two pieces and make a new record in the spreadsheet. So let's say, okay, let's add an action. This is the then, right? So in the flow over here, this first part is the if this, and the second part where it says actions is the then do this. So if it gets a webhook in, then we want to just make a new record in the spreadsheet, and the second thing is called create record. Let's push it. Then I need to say, okay, what table should it go to? I don't want to make a new city, right? I want to make a new student, so I'm going to select that. And then the fields. So my students, they have a name, the email, and a city. We're just not going to fill out the city for now. Let's say that happens after they finish studying or something. So I'm going to put in their name. And I could hard code that everyone's name should be Bob, but not everyone's name is Bob, right? I want to get that out of the webhook, out of the request that Webflow sent in. So I push the plus, and it says, okay, use the data from the actual stuff that came in from Webflow. And the name should be Celestine from our test data. So I'm just going to click until I find it saying Celestine. So in the body here, the name, it says email form. That doesn't say Celestine, so that's not the right name. I'm going to click on data here, and now it says Celestine. So I'm going to click on that. This is really the approach. Just keep clicking until you find the thing you need. And then I'm going to choose another field. And we also want to fill in the email. I'm going to push the plus again, go to the body, the data, and here it says the email I typed in the form. And I could run a preview test of this, but this should add a name and an email to my record. So I'm just going to turn this on and see, does it work now? So if I turn it on and I go back to the data tab, let's try typing in something new in my contact form, and let's see if it shows up there. So right now we have Mary and Carl. Let's try typing in Bob. I'll refresh. Bob at bob.com. Submit it. It's submitted. Let's go back to Airtable. Whoop, Bob's already there. I had an empty column. Probably I can just delete that one. But now whenever I fill out that form in just a few seconds, it gets added to Airtable. So just to loop back over the steps here, the first thing was I made a form on Webflow's end, and then we set it up. So in Airtable, there was a webhook that was set up to create a new record. And then on Webflow's end, I said, whenever you submit the form, you should send it over to Airtable at the URL that we copied for that webhook. So webhooks are like places where we are listening for certain requests. I'm getting some questions like, does Airtable check for redundancies? It does actually not check for redundancies. Probably there are ways that we could set it up to. I think probably if I really dug into the docs for it, there might be a way to like not have duplicate names. By default, it won't, yeah. Okay, so one last piece of this lecture. So the last piece is now we have this list of our students in Airtable. What if I want to show them on my website? That means, right, we've gone one direction. We've gone from Webflow to Airtable. But to show them on my Webflow site, I need to go the other direction. I need to go from Airtable to Webflow. And how am I going to do that? Here's the problem. Airtable does not support just sending data to Webflow by default. It just doesn't have that feature at the moment. sometimes you will run into this problem where you want to connect two apps, but it's not supported by default. And it turns out there's a service called, I've always heard people say it's Zapier aloud. I think it's called Zapier, not Zapier, I think. Please excuse me if I pronounce everything wrong. Zapier, the point of it is that it lets you glue, quote unquote, two apps together that aren't built to talk to each other already. It's really useful for businesses of all types. And it's also going to work along this format of if this, then that. So let's dive in and do it. So I'm going to open up Zapier's website. And this is another one. I already have an account with them. Yeah, I'm already logged in. So I'm already set up with them. And if I weren't set up, I would have to make a new account. And I'm on the free plan. On the free plan, you can only have 5 different zaps, they call them. Those are the if this, then that workflows you set up. So if you want to use Zapier a lot for a business, then you might need to use a paid plan. All these services, you can test them out as much as you want on a free plan. But if you really want to use them for large corporate use, you'll probably need to pay something, unfortunately. Okay. And the way Zapier works is you connect 2 apps. So it asks you, which 2 apps do you want to connect? And so the 2 apps that I want to connect, I want to connect Airtable to Webflow, right? So I'm just going to say, let's connect Airtable. Oh, and it's here to Webflow, right? They have a bunch of different services. So more things than just Webflow are showing up. This works with Salesforce, with like millions of other services. Well, not millions, but probably dozens. And then if this, then that. So when this happens, I select a trigger. So let's say whenever there's a new record in our spreadsheet, then we're going to want to send it over to Webflow. And I'm going to say create item. So what does create item mean? It means it's going to create a new item in Webflow CMS, one of those collections. And if I hop over to Webflow, you're learning to think in multiple services kind of at the same time. If I hop into Webflow and I just go to our website quickly, right now on our website, we don't have a place to store all of the students. So I'm going to add in a new collection that's going to be the place where all of my students can go. So I'll hop over to CMS and I'll make a new collection and I'll just call it students. And this is just going to be the place where we're going to copy over the students from Airtable. So in the collection fields, you can give basic info, the name, the slug, and I can do custom fields. We also had an email, so I have to put that in here, right? So I'll put an email and I'll call it email. And I'll create this collection. And now we have a place where I can send things when I come from Airtable. So right now I have no students, but I want to copy in all of the things from Airtable automatically here. And then I'm going to go back to Zapier. I'm going to say, okay, now from Airtable, when there's a new record in our base, we're going to go to Webflow and create a new item in the CMS. Let's try it. It gives me a little editor. Ooh, actually, I don't need that little editor. Funny. Weird. They've redone their interface like overnight. Let's try again. So from Webflow, or sorry, from Airtable, a new record in Airtable, to making a new record in Webflow. When this happens, a new record, then do this, create an item. Okay, let's try it. Okay, well, they've apparently overnight changed their interface, but that's fine. So I'm just going to click on both of these and make sure they're set up. So first thing, it asks you to choose the app. I actually already have my Airtable account logged in here, but if I didn't, it would just make me log in with Airtable. It would open a new tab and log me in. That's the only thing you need to do to connect the two of them. And then I can choose my account. I'm already logged in here, or I could connect a new one. I can push continue. And then I can choose which base do I want to use. And that was like the whole spreadsheet that I have. So I had one that was called the Wagon Workshop. That's the one we made. The table in here was called students. And I'm going to limit it. No, I don't need to limit it to a view. That would be like if I had some filtering and I wanted to limit the records. Include file contents. No, we don't have any files. That would be like if you uploaded attachments. Let's continue. Let's test it. And it should show me the last thing in the table, or maybe the first. Yeah, it shows me Mary. So that looks good. Okay, next step, Airtable end. Let's choose my Webflow account. I'm already signed in, but otherwise I would just have to enter my email and password. And then I choose the site. That was the Le Wagon Workshop demo. That's the one we were working from, and the collection. And we just made a collection called Students. And then, right, it knows that my students, that they have an email. So if I click in here, I need to pick which field should go in the email. I could hard code it, or I could look down here and see, oh, here's a little token for the email from Airtable, mary@mary.com. Let's click that. Then the name. Let's pick the name from Airtable. Then the slug, we don't have to change that. And then it does require you to say archived. That would just be if it hides it. I'm just going to put false here. And draft, I'm also going to put false. Let's just say that it'll be like published immediately. You can make draft records if you want to hide them for a bit. Let's continue. And then I think this is going to work. So let's just skip the test. Okay. Well, they're really trying to make me test it. So let's actually run that test. It should send Mary over to Webflow. Let's see if it worked. I'll go to Webflow. I'll refresh my students. It says it did it. Webflow is taking a second to update though. Students. Yeah, Mary's in here. It looks like it added them twice since maybe I clicked the text button twice, but it's added Mary. So let's delete these tests. Okay. Then next thing, I'm going to publish my Zap that back in Zapier. That means that I just say, okay, the test worked. I'm going to turn it on now. It's on. It actually gives me an option to transfer existing data. I think this is awesome. It just goes through the records we already have in Airtable, and it adds them into Webflow. It's going to ask me for some filters and things. It loads everything. Let's just select all of them. Let's say next. Let's send the data. Okay, let's exit the transfer. And now my Zap is on. So now Zapier is automatically going to do that. Anytime I add a new record to Airtable, it will add it onto my Webflow collection. If I go to Webflow in a sec, and I go to students, it might take a minute, but it should have all my students from Airtable in a minute. So now the last piece is maybe I would just show the students on my page so we can test it. Let's go to my contact page, and let's maybe add a new heading below the form and say, like, I'll make it an H2, and I'll say people who have already studied, something like that. I'll put in kind of no styling since we're short on time. I'll put in a collection list. And then I'll put in maybe just a quick bit of paragraph text. Let's put that in the collection item. Oh, I guess I have to double click to connect it. So this will come from the students. And then let's put in a bit of paragraph text. Let's get the text from students and let's make it be their name. Okay. Now, oh, I guess someone filled out the form maybe actually while watching. Funny. So Carl, Bob, and Mary are in here. And now if I go to my contact page and I fill it out, or let's actually publish it. Publish to selected domains. Ta-da, refresh the contact page. This is showing, contact us. Let's add in, what's a person's name? Sarah. Let's add in sarah@sarah.com. Let's submit it. And then it might take a second, but what now happens is Webflow sends it to Airtable. Sarah gets added here. Sarah gets sent from Zapier back to Webflow, to the collection. And then if I refresh, and I guess Zapier is taking maybe a second longer. Maybe I also have to republish, since things will have changed in the Webflow collection. Oh, Zapier is taking a second, but it might take a second, but Sarah will be added back in there. So that's the idea here. I see some people are already submitting to the form, so maybe our website will get really long. Don't break my free account. So those were the steps here, were to make a new Zapier workflow to connect things when they don't automatically glue together. And we use this format of if this, then that. We make a workflow that creates a new link going from our Airtable to our Webflow, and then I just put it on the page. So that's all the actual, I want to say coding we're going to do, but we did no coding. So does this work for you? So what are some of the things that are great about this? We've already seen that no code is easy to use. It's much easier to use than traditional tech tools. So you don't need specialized training to get started with it. And usually these services have really good documentation. Webflow in particular has this thing called Webflow University that I'll send out a link to, that if you really liked what you saw of Webflow, they have just like really good videos about how to use it. So you can learn quite a lot just from their official website. So it's easy to train people to use it. It is quick to deploy changes, and there's not as much friction between the design and the finished product, right? Usually you go through a whole design process, and then it's another month for the developer to build it. With Webflow, a designer can basically make your website. And it's relatively simple a lot of the time to link services together, which means that you can connect services that your marketing and sales and design teams are using with the ones that your development teams are using. So in a company with people with different skills, it can work to make a workflow that connects all of people's various tools together. The problems are that, well, first of all, you end up using a lot of external services. When you're coding things, you still use external services. So it's not like the problem doesn't exist on the other side, but all of the services I've mentioned, they cost money if you want to use them at a big scale as a big company. So I think the decision you make with no code is that you're more okay with paying a few monthly subscriptions for these types of services than hiring a whole developer to maintain everything, which probably is often more expensive. But you will probably have some subscription costs. And also, if Webflow goes bankrupt and shuts down, then you're a little bit screwed. But Webflow is a pretty successful company, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So you just pick your tools well. It also, the biggest problem, I think, is that developers and people who code get trained in how to make websites that work well. That includes websites that work well for people who can't see so well, can't hear so well, maybe have motor problems, people with varying types of disabilities. That's what we call accessibility. They also make websites that are usable just in terms of like having interfaces that are going to make sense to people. And then they make websites that have good performance, good SEO, so Google can find you, etc. So a developer is going to give you a better website since there's training that goes into understanding how to build them. That includes on no-code services. People who know how to code are probably going to build a better website on Webflow than someone who has less experience. And then the last piece that can get annoying is sometimes the services just don't do what you need, and then you get stuck like fixing these workflows that are very poorly connected with each other. So you have to kind of gauge whether the services actually do what you need and whether there are already things on the internet that can help you. So I think in a second now, I've seen some questions coming in. I'll answer them in the questions tab. But there's going to be an opportunity. Le Wagon is about hands-on learning. Our students do a lot of challenges and learn through experiencing. So what I'm actually going to do is to send out a link to the Le Wagon Learn platform. So when you hop onto the Learn platform from the link I show you, you'll see there's a no-code workshop for beginners. If you hop into it, there's some instructions for the lecture. That's what we've already done. The lecture slides are in there, so you'll have access to all of the slides I've shown you. And you'll also have access to a video after we finish recording it right now. So tonight you'll have a video of this exact lecture. And then there's the Your Turn section. The Your Turn section includes 1, 2, 3, 4 challenges that you're welcome to work on for the next 40 minutes or so. That includes starting to build a website in Webflow together. I'll be on the questions tab offering support if people need resources. Adding e-commerce features to that website. So we've done some CMS stuff together in lecture, but you're going to try out what it's like to build a shopping site. So it's going to be a store. The idea is the store can sell anything you want. So if you want it to sell like rare pottery, then it can sell that, whatever you want. As long as it's within community standards. And then the third piece is that you'll create an Airtable database where you're going to actually store all of the customers who are interested in subscribing to your newsletter. Since your store is doing so well, people want a newsletter. And then you'll integrate that with a Webflow form. So that's kind of like the first part of that connection we did, going from a Webflow form to getting it into Airtable. There are fleshed out instructions here, but please feel free to ask questions if you don't understand the instructions. And I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I will send out now this link that should give you all access to that page. The Learn platform will ask you to sign up with an email and a password. Okay, so I've just sent